We're still waiting on Mr. Dews. But in the interim, Tom, I was hoping you could give your presentation on the crime data and if we have extra time too on the pending bills before the legislature.
Sure, this will be very quick. Um, and we're in touch with Mr. Deuce. He'll be here soon. He's just running a little bit late for us.
Got it.
Okay, so these are all the bills that are currently pending in the legislature that would implement recommendations from the committee. There's about 7 of them. Um, I'll just go through them very quickly. Obviously, if anyone has questions, please let me know. So AB 1036 from Assemblymember Schultz will implement some of the recommendations around post-conviction discovery, particularly around expanding who is eligible to ask the DA for discovery. 622 from Assemblymember Colra would implement the recommendation to apply Prop 57 credits fully to people with indeterminate sentences. This is the issue that's currently tied up in litigation. And in fact, the appellate court's going to hear argument in that case later in May. So we might get some indication there of what might happen. But that bill would be an attempt to apply the credits as the voters intended. 821 from Senator Arguin would implement the requirement from the United States Supreme Court's decision saying that a judge has to look at the probable cause for a warrantless arrest promptly, but no later than 48 hours, something that should be in the penal code, particularly because that case arose from Riverside County. SB 560 from Senator Smallwood Cuevas would implement the benefit overpayments recommendation, which was also called welfare fraud. And Rick has been working very hard on that one. And SB 277 from Senator Weber Pearson would say consent searches during traffic stops, the officer has to have reasonable suspicion before the officer can ask for consent, which is what the committee recommended a few years ago. AB 1279 from Assemblymember Sharp Collins would disallow the use of juvenile adjudications as strikes. That requires a supermajority in the legislature because it's amending a voter initiative. SB 672 by Senator Rubio would let youthful offender parole be available for people who have life without parole sentences, which would be a step towards the committee's recommendation a few years ago to have a review of all life without parole sentences. So this is a great list, particularly I think in the climate in the legislature and around the country right now. And we'll keep you all updated as things go. I think all of these at this point have gotten out of the relevant public safety committee, and then there's appropriations and a lot of votes beyond that. Okay, any questions about that? I'll move on to the crime statistics. So,
No, but I will just say thank you all for this is, we do all this work, we think about these things, and then we kind of throw them out into the universe. And it's really incredible how many of our ideas get picked up as legislation and then ultimately passed. Tom, maybe if we could just keep everybody posted as these bills move through the legislature, just um, to keep a little bit better eye on them for those of us who are not. I know that you guys are keeping close watch, but anyhow, sorry.
yeah, we'll report back next month at our meeting for sure, and hopefully we'll continue to have news.
Excellent.
Okay, crime data. So we can look at full year violent crime data for 2024 for the 8 largest jurisdictions in California and other similarly large jurisdictions for the rest of the country. So we aren't able to look at property crime, it's just violent crime, but the news is really good, which is that there's a greater than 8% decrease in overall violent crime in the cities that we can look at. Bigger than we see in the cities outside of California, which has not been the case when we looked at this previously, whereas about 5.5%. And some really, big decreases in particular offenses, a 15% decrease in homicide, 12% decrease in reported rapes, 6.5% for robbery, and almost 9% for aggravated assaults. And in the counties that are just the jurisdictions that are just in Los Angeles, which is the city of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and the areas patrolled by the sheriff's department, we also see pretty big decreases, with the exception being around a 1% increase in robbery. I expect we'll see similar decreases in property crime when that data becomes available. And what I've seen of 2025 so far, obviously we're just a few months in, shows that crime is continuing to decrease even from these decreases in 2024. So, the FBI was supposed to move towards monthly reporting of data. unclear if that's going to continue given everything that's happening at the federal level right now. So what we're going to rely on is the police departments reporting this data and some other work that's being done by something called the Real-Time Crime Index. So anyway, so I think this is great news, and hopefully the trend will continue. All right, I see Mr. Dews is here. Sorry, Mike.
Great. I just want to say thank you very much. I think that we're one of the few agencies who really keep track of this data as closely as we do. The governor's office even calls us to ask for some of this information. It's sort of a little bit shocking that it's not better recorded. Yeah, one thing that I would love, Tom, in future, and I know that these are kind of interim reports that you are preparing, is sometimes we're even falling into this trap of like year to year changes, is if we could also have kind of maybe a 5 or 10 year trend line, just so we can understand where things are going. And
Sure.
and and am I correct that we are approaching pre-pandemic record lows again across the board?
I think that's correct. Obviously, some exceptions in some areas that won't be true everywhere, but I think as a general statement, that is true.
Well, thank you.
And that's not just the California thing, that's across the country. It's not like, you could tie it to any one thing California has done. It just seems to be the pandemic was extremely disruptive, and it's taken years to sort of work through those disruptions.
No, I understand. But again, it runs counter to the sort of prevailing narrative that, crime is really out of control when, it continues to go down. So thank you so much. Mr. Dews, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Let me introduce you and let me set the stage a little bit. Our next presenter is Justin Dews, who's the chair of the New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy's Clemency Advisory Board. He will tell us a bit about the approach that New Jersey is taking to reviewing cases that present some of the issues we've been discussing today. Mr. Dews, we'd love to hear from you for about 5 minutes, and then we'll do a short Q&A. So thank you again for joining us.
Great. Thank you again for having me here. So let me just give a little bit of background to a bunch of folks who are in this policy space who know a lot about clemency. As it is no surprise to you, clemency is kind of a unilateral authority the governor has. And Governor Murphy's, who is in his second term right now, he has about a little more than a year and a half left. Up until last December, had not granted any clemencies. So in June, well, rather in the lead up to June of 2024, he and his team were thinking about a way to use the clemency power in what they thought would be the most effective and equitable way. I will say I've one of the fun facts about it, I've never been to California before, though I've been on the West Coast, but I imagine your state is as upstanding and upright, unlike New Jersey, which is known to be a little bit where politics is a bit of a blood sport here, and folks tend to trade on influence in a way that I don't think is like
We don't do
matched
any
in
of that.
other
We
parts of
don't
the
do any
country.
of
I
that.
could be wrong. I
Oh,
could
yeah.
be wrong. You are the Golden State for a reason. Um, but as a result, a lot of clemency in New Jersey was granted because folks had the right connections to a party boss. That's what it was. And so, or to the governor, who was staffed with folks in his front office who were, recommended by party bosses in the past. So there was so the governor wanted to depart from that, and what his team had come up with was a board of outside advisors, 6 of us, none of us, this is our full-time job. This is all part-time, to advise him on on who he should grant clemency to. And given the amount of applications that were in the queue, because of the length of time that they had been sitting in the governor's office, they created a system that an expedition system. So certain categories of folks with offenses would get their application considered at the front of the queue. So individuals, for example, and this is all laid out in the executive order that the governor signed, individuals who met time-based criteria. So if there had been more than 10 years since the applicant completed their most recent sentence, and if it had been more than 5 years or if it had been more than 5 years since the applicant had completed their most recent sentence, and that person was at least 60 years old, or more than 5 years since the completion of the last sentence, and that applicant was 25 years or younger at the time of the offense. There was a offense-based expedition. So if a person did not seek clemency for what we have in New Jersey called the No Early Release Act, which is certain first-degree offenses that are serious enough so that a person has to serve at least 85% of their time. They can't get paroled sooner than that. So like murder, for example. So they weren't seeking clemency for one of those offenses. If they sought clemency for an offense that's no longer unlawful, or if the Attorney General's Conviction Review Unit, which looks at actual claims of actual innocence, referred an application to us because they thought maybe it wouldn't pass the Conviction Review Unit standards, but there are some things in here that would suggest clemency is warranted. And then for folks who are currently incarcerated for commutation or pardons, we would expedite their review if it's someone who was convicted of a crime, someone who was a victim of domestic or physical or sexual abuse, and is convicted of a crime against their victimizer, or committed a crime under the duress or coercion of the victimizer, someone who received an excessive trial penalty, and similarly, someone who was convicted of a crime that is no longer unlawful, or the Conviction Review Unit submitted it to us for review. And so the governor announced this on June of 2024. The board got to work right away, and he made his first clemency announcements in December of 2024. 33 at that time, sorry, 36 at the time, 33 were pardons, 3 were commutations, and then this April, actually, so earlier this month, April 8th, he made another 90 something clemency decisions, and put him over 120 odd grants, which to give perspective is more than every other governor of New Jersey in the past 30 years combined. Like clemency is not something that was really used, and like I said, when it was used, it was in the traditional, this is somebody who knows somebody, this may have been a campaign donor. It really wasn't done in a way that allowed your average person without that kind of connection to really access the process in a way. And so that's where we are. We're still going strong. We plan to work until the end of his term, which is January of 2026. So I think that covers everything. Hopefully, I think I kept it under 5 minutes. I know it was rushing a bit, but happy to take any questions. I certainly have a lot of thoughts on this process, and so just happy to talk about ideas.
Thank you. I think we're all quite interested in clemency, in particular in this area in particular. Professor Ochin, why don't you kick us off?
Hi, Mr. Dews. Nice to meet you. Thanks for being here. I'm wondering if you have, given the topic of today's discussion being intimate partner and domestic violence, I'm wondering if you have any data on the number of individuals who are granted clemency due to or as a predominant reason being the domestic violence or intimate partner violence that they experience.
So the majority of commutation cases, because most of the individuals who have received clemency via commutation are individuals who in their application said they were convicted because they committed an act against their victimizer. And most of the individuals who have received the commutation so far have been individuals who have been victims of domestic or sexual abuse. The exact numbers, I do not have the exact numbers, but it is most of our commutees so far fall in that category.
And in the first batch that you mentioned, I think you mentioned was 30 something. Most of those were
Yeah.
part handful
Yes.
Commutations. In that second batch, you said there were 90. Do you have the ratio as, pardons and then commutations?
It's also mostly pardons. I believe the governor granted, I believe it was, I want to say 10 commutations, in that. Commutations tend to be just more, as you can imagine, a little more difficult to grant, even though we get a lot of applications. We are particular in making sure that an individual who's granted a commutation is not simply based on the facts of the application. There are also considerations of, well, does a person have a plan once they get out? Because what we don't want to do is grant somebody, and grant some of the commutations aren't right onto, right, open the jailhouse door and let folks walk out. It'll be, we may reduce their sentence, but for the folks who we recommend and the governor grants commutation onto release, or into parole, or commutation just straight into release from state custody. One of the things we look for is, do they have a plan? Are there folks who would receive them? Because what we don't want is to just release somebody and then they have no support system, so they end up back in the same place that they were. I will say one of the things that has been helpful in this process is, and I know it's not the same for every state, but our commissioner of corrections is actually a very close partner with us. For folks who apply, and part of the application, we see, like I said, what their plan, their reentry plan is. If they don't have one, but their application is otherwise strong, we make sure the commissioner of corrections knows this and is prepared to help connect them with services once they get out. So that is something that we are very intentional about. On the exact numbers, I mean, I can get you that information. I can send that to Rick so that you can have that at your disposal.
I have a couple of questions. I'm really fascinated by clemency in general. Fascinated slash a little bit have problems with it. And I'm curious to see how New Jersey's handling this. By the way, I should say that we've often looked to New Jersey as a model of certain reforms. So, you guys have done a great job in a lot of areas. Number one, my understanding is, so obviously the governor can give clemency in any area he would like, but he said there's a couple priorities that I have, and you, Mr. Dews, he's created sort of these private boards that specialize in the particular areas. Is that correct?
I no. So
Okay.
he has, the board is just, there's just one board, and it's comprised of individuals with various backgrounds. So we have folks who come from the criminal defense community, folks come from the AG is represented on the board, folks from the
I see.
prosecutorial community, and then folks from the criminal justice policy community on that board.
So you don't have like an intimate partner violence clemency department.
No. What we do have now, we have the expedited categories. And I should say the expedited categories don't mean that those are the only categories that get looked at. It's just that because we have so many applications, we had to figure out a way to, for lack of a better term, get the easy ones out the door first.
Yeah,
But
no, no.
anyone
Yeah,
can apply, and we
yeah,
look at all applications.
of course, everybody should have priorities. I understand that.
Yeah.
And intimate partner violence sounds like is a priority for the government.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Do you have an idea of what percentage of your recommendations have been accepted or granted?
I would have to ask the governor's office that. It's a most, so I
Most,
will
few?
both most of the individuals who have gotten a majority yes from the board have received, have been recommended, have received clemency.
So most of the people that you guys have recommended by majority vote have received clemency.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Great. Congratulations. I'm moving fast. I'm curious a little bit to hear a little bit about your investigation. It sounds like you rely on the clemency packet submitted by the person who's been incarcerated. Do you guys have any extra investigation? You send investigators out? Do you interview the clemency prospective clemency recipient?
So our board is a recipient of information that gets filtered through multiple other bodies. So I have to explain that. So when someone applies for clemency, applications go to the state parole board. They compile all the information, the letters of recommendation, everything else. They do the outreach to our county prosecutors to see if they have any comments on the applicant, whether they think the person should not be granted, or they don't care, or they recommend they should be. Then that packet goes to the governor's office, and the governor's office reviews it and writes a memo for us, because all these basically are on paper. There's 6 board members, and we're in different locations across the state. And so the governor's office compiles that into a memo for the board members, and then we review that memo. And then we come to our board meetings having reviewed, let's say, 100 memos of applicants, and then vote based on that information. Sometimes we have questions about the information that we have. We want more information. And so what we then do is, when we vote, some of us vote, I vote, let's say, a conditional yes, pending review of more information. Then that person, if that person gets a majority vote, even with the conditional grant included as a yes, that person gets interviewed by the governor's office, where then they ask more information about the individual. Concurrently, our victims advocacy unit in the attorney general's office makes phone calls to the victims, if they can be reached, to get their input into the release of the potential release of the individual. And then all that information is compiled, and it doesn't come back to us. So even though my vote may be conditional yes, pending more information, I vote conditional yes and leave it to the governor's office to decide whether, based on the information they have, they should view my conditional grant as a yes, or if they should take it as a no, because the information doesn't meet what I would have said yes to if I had that information in front of me at the time of our meeting. Then they take that to the governor. If in a perfect world, because we're more of a front end process. In a perfect world, if we had more time, and that's the issue with having, with all due respect to the governor, I worked for him in his first term. Having waited till the last minute, there's a bit of a triage aspect to this, and so we just don't have the capacity for the board to do an investigation, so that we're more of a back end user of the information. We have to depend on a lot of collation of facts in order to make our recommendation.
And I totally appreciate the expediency. I also appreciate that the panel that you were speaking to, that our committee, is part-time, and that we all have day jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But I was wondering, except for the staff are full-time. I was wondering if you had a thought on just the wisdom generally on clemency, the governor relying on outside independent citizens to make these recommendations, or should this really all be within the governor's office in an ideal circumstance? I was wondering what your wisdom thoughts on that are.
So in an ideal world, it should be in the governor's office. However, I have come to appreciate, and so to give a little background about myself, I mentioned I worked for the governor in his first term. I actually had the criminal justice portfolio in his counsel's office. I remember day one, he was inaugurated, and I got a box of clemencies dropped on my desk to make decisions about what he should grant and what he should deny. And I did that. They wrote the memos and all this stuff and gave it to the chief counsel that then sat on his desk until we get to June of 2024. So and we all know there are reasons for that, right? Folks are nervous about using their clemency power before their reelection campaign, because what if someone who they grant clemency to does something that makes it more difficult, it's using an attack at. And then you have legislative races where you don't want your legislators to have to answer for a decision you make. Like, we all get the politics of it. So I understand why there's a delay, and I also understand why you want the buffer of an outside group to kind of make the decisions, so that if something were to go wrong per se, you can blame it on somebody else. And I think it gives a governor more comfort doing that. But I also think that there are benefits to an outside group, because, as I tell our board members, we are now political actors. It is our job to just look at the facts and make decisions. The politics are above us, and ultimately, we make recommendation, but it's the governor's decision ultimately. And if he wants to make a political consideration when it comes to a recommendation we make, that's on him. That's not on us. That's not our mandate, and we shouldn't feel compelled to do that. Right now, I actually don't know if I am not aware of the governor having really used um, having thought politically about some of these decisions. And I'm quite happy to say that. But so I tend to think in a perfect world, it should be in the governor's office and it should start early. I think that this is a good alternative. One thing I do feel strongly about though is that this should not be something created by statute. I don't think legislators should get involved in it at all. I see there's an assembly person on this call. Um, uh, Again, our state legislature full of knuckleheads. I'm pretty sure California has a legislature full of upright and other like just talented, really smart
The very
policymakers.
best.
But
The very
I
best.
again,
Yeah.
the Golden State for a reason, right? Um, but I've seen too many times when legislators get their hands into something, they want to say in it. So, for example, my concern if the legislature were to mandate this by statute, that then they would want a seat on the board. You know, you have to put someone who is picked by the Senate president and the Assembly speaker, and then the picks it then becomes a patronage position, right? And then legislators like to spend money, and so then you want more, you want to create more staff, and then it becomes an institutionalized thing where folks then see it as a prestige job, a patronage job, and it doesn't stem from, I don't know, the belief that you're working for a good cause. And I think right now, all of us on the board feel like the responsibility of this and don't see it as um, just a job to do or something prestigious to have in our hand. It's like, no, we were called to do this to get as much as we can done to help the governor. And then once our mission is done, we are going to be done. So we got to do a good job quickly and thoughtfully and efficiently. And so that's one reason I don't think the legislature should mandate this. Also, I just generally, as a constitutional issue, separation of powers, I don't think the legislature should creep into something that is at the unilateral discretion of the governor. Because I just, because once that creep starts happening, it can happen in other places. And so I think that is something that just should be kept separate. That's the thing that that's the thing that I just feel strongly about, that it should be a creature of the governor's discretion. Now, should a governor sign an executive order day one? Absolutely. I think that should happen. But, I don't think it should be legislatively mandated.
This is super interesting. Thank you very much. Do others have questions?
Yeah, I have a question. And this is both for Mr. Dews as well as the staff. We haven't talked much about resentencing, and I'm wondering if New Jersey or elsewhere, if there's guidance on, say, resentencing criteria that takes into it, or if it's currently. So I'm also admitting ignorance in terms of our current resentencing statute. So if it's not based on a change in law, more so based on, someone and their conduct while they're inside, are there sort of priority areas involving people who may have experienced intimate partner or domestic violence? Is resentencing a vehicle that states have considered to sort of address this problem in hindsight, or is it not really a related, is this not something that are they not put in conversation with each other?
So I'll speak on for New Jersey. They are not something that's not something that's come up. The idea being that a lot of these, like, oftentimes that defense is raised at trial, presuming they go to trial, and yet a jury of their peers have said that that does not mitigate significantly enough, or one, it doesn't shouldn't remove the consequence, or it doesn't mitigate enough to lower the sentencing. So it becomes that then clemency is the vehicle to address that. Is it something that our legislators would likely look at in New Jersey? I actually don't. I don't think so. Chair Romano, I appreciate you saying that you look to New Jersey for a lot of reforms. We actually have a fairly moderate legislature that can be scared of its own shadow when it comes to issues of criminal justice. So I don't see that being something that they would take up in the near or midterm.
So California's resentencing laws do not create an independent avenue for folks who are IPV victims, but it is a factor that the courts are supposed to consider when somebody comes back for resentencing under various different mechanisms. So that's the current state of things here. Assemblymember Bryan.
Yeah, just want to thank you for all of this, Justin, and kind of further explore that no legislature part, mostly because, I definitely hear what you're saying, and this shouldn't be a kind of a bureaucratic thing, right? We shouldn't build up new structures, new staff, et cetera. I mean, this board, for example, exists as one of those entities where there is some of that. There is staff, Tom, Rick. There are legislative appointments, one senator, one assembly member. I think we've provided pretty tremendous recommendations to the governor and to the legislature. It was created for the purposes of advising the governor. I think back to something somebody once told me about how Jerry Brown used to let his wife read through the clemency applications and like she would make the decisions. And like I'm sure that was a very I don't know how much truth or not truth there is to that, but I do know the person who told me definitely it was credible. That was just kind of Jerry's process of figuring out which of these applications were worthy and not. I guess my bigger concern with the legislative push is that it just becomes, dependent on who the appointee is. I think if somebody like me served on a clemency recommendation advisory committee for the governor, that would. I also think having a legislative voice gives more pressure to those recommendations. That it's not an executive only decision, but now the bodies are engaged in it. So I don't know, just kicking it back and forth because I think this is an important idea and something to think about. And I'm not advocating for a legislative response, just wondering if you could expand more on more of your concerns and if you see any benefit to having additional voices in a process like that of a decision-making authority beyond just the governor getting the only I guess political voice to the process.
So yes, happy to expound on that. So I'm gonna flip what I said about the legislature making a patronage position and then the constitutional aspect. We'll talk about the constitutional aspect first. So I do think, just to reiterate, because our state constitution, and I'm sure it's the same thing in the California Constitution, says that it is the governor's effectively his or her sole authority to make this decision. I just think any statute that directs the governor how to the process by which to make his decision, I just impedes on that constitutional authority, and I'm not comfortable. I am not comfortable allowing that, like seeing that happen, because again, for our legislature, I know once a door gets like cracked open there, they're going to try to like make other inroads into the governor's authority. But to your second point, but to your point about having legislators on the committee itself, I actually don't think that's a bad idea. I think that's something for us to consider in the next iteration. And when I say us, we have a governor's race this November. And I specifically called on the candidates who are running both on the D and R side to consider to keeping this board up. Not that we need to trust me. If they ask me to serve again, I'd say thank you. It's been wonderful, but I'm good. But because I do think you need fresh perspectives and folks who are eager and willing to do this, because it is, as you know, on a board that's part-time, you got full-time jobs. It takes a lot of work to do. And so after a while, it can just become a rote exercise. And when you're dealing with people's life and liberty, it should never be rote. And so I think you need fresh perspectives in that respect. Um, so I think whoever does this, if they do it early in their term, they should consider having the governor, or at least I would want to think more about having the governor have legislative members on it, but not that the legislature recommends the member. Like, let the governor decide who the person from the legislature is. Um, I will also say a countervailing consideration is, you know, our board is, I believe, our board to be protected from politics. We make a very concerted effort to say, like, I've had elected officials call me to advocate for somebody, and I'll say, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm writing this down. I can't tell you where the person is in the process. I can only tell you this generic thing because I don't want my decision swayed by Deputy Whip so and so when John Smith, all he has is his application, his mom and dad and younger cousin to like write on his behalf. Those two applications should be treated the exact same. And we try our best to do that. Adding political actors to a non-political board, I would be concerned that maybe some of the political considerations, which are valid for a political actor to consider, may start to come into the board. And so I would just want to make sure that any political actor who would be on it is themselves in the decision-making process, insulated and isolated from the political pressures that they may have, that are reasonable for other decisions they have to make, but for this one should truly should not impact the process. But I do think it is something to consider.
No, I mean, I think this is really powerful because I could see this two ways where somebody like me is saying, look, we need to let this, the governor should grant clemency to this person, and a different appointee saying that despite the board's recommendation, I disagree with the rest of the board. We should not, for political reasons, and that's very, very interesting. So, give me a lot to think about. But thank you for all of your service in New Jersey, because
course.
you're right. These kinds of committees and boards take a lot of time. And Chair Romano and others have dedicated significant amount of time to this work. And so just thank you for joining us despite your busy schedule.
No, this is I work at a law firm. It's fine, but this is like my passion. Like, I do love the public service, so happy to talk to you all. Rick has my email address. Happy to reach, like, please, if you have any questions or thinking about a similar process, recommending a similar process for Governor Newsom or whoever is going to be the next governor of the state, happy to be a resource in that. And as I said earlier, we'll certainly follow up with the information asked, so that you can get the data on, what our numbers are in terms of the breakdown on offenses, offense categories, commutation, v pardons.
Thank you so much. Lots of great stuff grows in the Garden State. So I
Thank you.
appreciate it. And
Thank you.
really, I really do appreciate it. I suspect we will be in touch, and thank you for following up on the few questions that we had for you. We're going to take a break for lunch now. I'd like to return at 1:20. And for the rest of the afternoon, we're not going to have any other panelists, but we will have some presentations, discuss what we're taking from these conversations we've had this morning and where we want staff to focus on for the future, and then of course have public comment. So thank you all. We'll return at 1:20 after lunch.